Imagine waking up in a quiet medieval village, only to learn a family on the edge of town has died within days. At first, you might hope it's an isolated tragedy. Then the neighbor's house goes quiet. Then another. The church bells ring constantly for the dead, until eventually they fall silent, because there is no one left alive to pull the ropes. This localized nightmare was a microscale version of a larger collapse. Within a few years, these scenes would replay in cities and ports across the entire continent. Before the dying began, 14th century Europe was experiencing massive economic and population growth. This photograph of a Gothic cathedral illustrates the wealth of the era, showcasing the architectural complexity medieval societies could suddenly afford. That wealth was held almost entirely by an aristocratic landowning class. They relied on a rigid feudal system, where peasant laborers were kept at the bottom of the hierarchy, abundant and easily replaced. This map shows how trade routes connected Europe, the Middle East, and Asia more tightly than at any previous point in history. As merchants moved goods across continents, the cities where these routes intersect swelled with concentrated capital and growing populations. But the efficiency of this commercial network contained a hidden vulnerability. The routes moving precious metals also moved pathogens. Tucked in cargo holds, the disease hitched a ride. Creeping westward along the trade lines, it followed the exact paths used for commerce. No king's army could fight an enemy they couldn't see, and medieval medicine possessed no capacity to identify a microscopic organism, let alone halt its advance. The very infrastructure that generated European prosperity became the delivery system for its collapse. When the pathogen made landfall in the late 1340s, the first reports from the coast were extreme, that they sounded unbelievable to those living further inland. But the physical reality arrived quickly. Healthy people developed sudden fevers and dark swellings on their bodies, dying within a matter of days. This photograph displays neatly arranged rows of skeletons, proving how the mortality rate forced communities to systematically bury casualties by the thousands. Bereft of any scientific explanation, desperate people searched for reasons. Rumors of contaminated air and divine punishment spread rapidly through terrified populations. The sheer volume of death overwhelmed basic societal functions. Doctors fell ill beside their patients, and fields rotted in the sun. Panic fragmented society down to the individual household. Survival meant total isolation, forcing local businesses to board up their windows and severing the ties between neighbors. The death toll reached a threshold where the operational infrastructure of medieval life simply stopped working. The psychological toll of this omnipresent threat was immense. This woodcut of dancing skeletons shows how medieval society began to visually process death as a constant, inescapable companion. Faced with random, unavoidable slaughter, the peasant class turned to the two pillars of their existence: the political protection of their feudal lords and the spiritual salvation of the church. Both institutions failed. Royal decrees could not stop the infection from crossing city walls, and prayers offered no physical immunity to the dying faithful. Seeing the ruling class succumb to the exact same disease as the peasantry eroded the logic of the social order. The perceived infallibility of the elite did not survive the plague. As the pandemic eventually passed, the survivors stepped out into a hollowed-out continent. This image of stone ruins surrounded by overgrowth helps visualize the silence of a world that had lost nearly half its population. But that loss of life created a new economic reality. The working class, once overabundant, was suddenly a scarce resource. This diagram shows the resulting friction. The supply of available workers drops drastically, while societal demand to harvest crops remains heavy. For the first time, the math changed. The leverage tips firmly to the surviving peasants. They were no longer expendable. Workers quickly realized the value of their labor. They began demanding higher daily wages, refusing to work in poor conditions, and moving to find the best possible opportunities. Traditional history often focuses on organized peasant rebellions or political manifestos to explain the end of the feudal order. Yet this microscopic organism accomplished that shift in less than a generation, succeeding where centuries of human politics had failed. By altering the demographics of the continent, the plague forced a transfer of economic leverage to the working class. The failure of old protections, coupled with newfound economic mobility, forced a shift in how survivors viewed their place in the world. People began to question the rigid social hierarchies they had once accepted as divine. That skepticism accelerated the cultural shifts that would eventually manifest as the Renaissance. We usually credit sweeping historical changes to the actions of famous monarchs or the invention of new technologies. But the modern era did not begin solely through human design. It grew from the wreckage of a 14th century catastrophe that cleared away the old order to make room for something new.